Welcome back to The Point, a special episode where we discuss the deeper, wider meanings of the verdict yesterday from Maharashtra and Haryana. To what extent does the message from those two states suggest that Indian politics is changing? Let's look briefly at what this means for Congress. If they cannot get the Gandhis to revive the party, Badshah said, and it doesn't look as if Rahul has that capacity, sometimes it looks as if he doesn't even want to do it. Do you think there's a danger that party could split as frustration sets in and people decide they need other avenues to fulfill their own political ambitions?
Well, there isn't much left to split, but it's always generally happened that way. I mean, in 77, that's what happened. It split. There was this Brahmananda Reddy and all walked out. In between also there's been a split or two. So it's possible. It's possible that there could be a rumbling within. At the moment they are chucking people out, suspending people like Brar from Punjab and so on and so, who said that the Gandhi family should go. The basic point that the Gandhi family is failing to see, or more, I think a lot of the Congress guys, to use the marketplace analogy once again, it needs to rebrand itself. The Congress brand is tired and old. It needs to rebrand. It needs to find where it fits into the political marketplace. I'm sorry I'm using crass words like political marketplace, but that's the easiest way of defining it. That it doesn't know where it fits in. It's lost its base. I don't know who says they belong to the Congress. Javed just said that the Muslims have gone long ago. So there's nobody who belongs to the Congress.
Pirandello talked of 6 characters in search of an author. You're talking of a party in search of a raison d'etre.
Or a market.
Vandita Mishra.
But at the same time, Congress is a party that still has about 20% of the vote in a very divided polity. Right? So it's not a party that can be written off. Also, today the possibility of a split is much less because the very reason why Congress party has become so weak, which is the complete destruction of state level leadership, is also the reason why it finds it that much tougher to split, because everybody depends on the Gandhis. So
the Gandhis, far from being a factor that could lead to a split, could be the one factor that keeps the glue together, even as the party collapses.
Gandhis are the only factor that keeps the party together.
Okay.
The party is not being kept together by ideology anymore. That is the problem with Congress party.
Vandita Mishra, let me put another Congress scenario to you. It may not split, but there's no one there to revive the party. Indira did it in 77 because she had that personality and the capacity. Sonia did it in 2004 because people didn't realize, but she had that skill. This time around, there's no one. So could Congress eventually turn into the Indian equivalent of the British Liberal Party? A rump that limps on and on and on, but has a pretty ineffectual, meaningless role to play?
There have been reports, and those reports have been gaining ground, that all the focus that Rahul Gandhi is ostensibly bringing to the organization will yield some large-scale changes. So I think we should wait and watch. Maybe there will be some kind of new leadership that comes up from below. Maybe Rahul Gandhi will take the necessary and courageous step and open his own post to an election. Maybe you have an election after all for the post of Congress President and Vice President. In that case, we are looking at a new Congress. It's a possibility.
All right. It's very interesting that the future of Congress hinges on that critical word which you use 4 times, maybe. It doesn't suggest great optimism. It just suggests don't rule out the party. A miracle can always happen. Manani, let's come to Narendra Modi. Many people seem to compare his position with that of Indira Gandhi after 1971, when she had this incredible combination of enormous power and enormous popularity. Within 4 years, it brought out a dictatorial streak in her. Is there a danger that the same combination in Mr. Modi could bring out the authoritarian side of his character?
Well, I think times have changed so much that he does not have to be explicitly authoritarian in order to be totalitarian. In the sense that already.
That's a good line.
No, because there are very few critics of Mr. Modi left in the media.
And let me encourage you to be one of them.
No, I'm saying that the whole way that, Mr. Modi has captured the imagination, a lot of it is to do with the exponential rise of the media. And and the nature of the media, social
Can I
media,
be blunt?
so many channels.
Is there any danger that this media attention and the power and the adulation from his party at any rate can turn his head, to put it bluntly?
Well, it already has turned his head. I mean, he really, I mean, already there are people in social media saying he should be renamed Mahatma Modi. You know, there is all this talk going on. So I think Mr. Modi has got phenomenal success far too quickly, but it comes down to the economy. Now I think people are expecting the moon. I mean, you know, every caste thinks
Mars.
that the Mars. And if he fails to deliver, there's also a lot of RSSization going on. So I mean, coming back to your earlier question of Congress, I don't think the idea of the Congress is dead. What the Congress
But come back
represents
to Modi.
is
Back to Modi.
So I'm saying that for Modi, Mr. Modi, you know, he could be the greatest leader of India's seen and last for 30 years. But that will depend, I think, if he delivers, if India becomes the superpower and economic as well as.
I'm going to interrupt Manini.
In the next
She's
5 to
agonizing
7
over
years.
her answer. I suspect she wants to say that she's worried there is an authoritarian streak that can come to the full, but she wants to be diplomatic and not say it quite so bluntly.
No, I think it's so obvious.
You're
One doesn't
not
have to
a
state it.
diplomat. Let me ask you, as you look down the 4 or 5 years ahead of us, are you worried that Mr. Modi could become, I'm not going to use the word monster because that would be unfair and rude, but a very powerful prime minister whose exercise of authority could cause concern?
Look at the history of mankind and look at the history of governance, democracy and otherwise. This kind of adulation and power almost always invariably goes to your head. There are very few exceptions. So Mr. Modi will have to be extraordinary to be that exception, because look what's
Has he got
happening.
it in him to be extraordinary?
We don't know. How do we know? Because he's now being tested. Look at the kind of sycophancy that BJP has now unleashed. It makes Congress party of the past look sort of decent in comparison.
So the auguries are not good.
Okay, no, well, Mr. Modi has to deal with it, because Mr. Modi has to first of all tell his cabinet ministers to stop talking about him, but to talk about themselves and what they are doing. Nobody does it anymore.
Okay. Let me focus briefly in the limited time left on whether Mr. Modi's new position, the strength of the BJP, suggests that the difficult reforms that he's failed to tackle so far, and he's got a certain amount of criticism from investors both in India and abroad for not doing so, whether now he'll do it. I'm talking about labor law reform, I'm talking about land acquisition amendments, I'm talking about scrapping of retrospective legislation and taxation, even something like GST. Will he push determinedly ahead, or will he wait and hedge his bets and say, I want to see what happens in Jharkhand, I want to see what happens in Bihar, I want to see what happens in UP, I want to see what happens in Assam, I don't want to lose those seats? Which will be his instinctive response?
I think if he doesn't do it now, he'll never be able to do it. Because if he waits for UP and Bihar, by then, maybe things may not be as rosy
But
as
it
they
will not be
appear.
so easy, because what he has not yet learned is that even with his majority, he still has to talk to the opposition. Without that,
Yes,
he
a
cannot,
lot of it cannot happen without Congress support.
Cannot get his
in the
legislation
Rajya Sabha.
through. It's in his interest.
And let me get in my two guests who are with me in OB and rather here in studio. One is our first two, and then I'll come to Akar Patel. What's your feeling first on that question about Mr. Modi? Does he have the makings of a very authoritative, if not authoritarian leader? And is that something we should be a little cautious of as we look down the road? Or am I being unfair in even asking that question?
No, of course, that's a very fair question to be asked, because what Mr. Modi seems to be creating is a one-party dominance system, and within the party, it's a single man, it's a one-man show. But the really interesting question is to ask how that's going to work in a polity that is not the same as the one that the Congress presided over when it ran its own one-party dominant system. We have now a situation in which the states have become the primary locales of politics as well as economy. So it's that dynamic between the center and the state that will need to be watched, that interplay of centralization versus decentralization.
With that in mind, Akar Patel, but don't make that the focus of your answer, what do you think would be Mr. Modi's attitude to the difficult reforms that so far he has shied away from? Now that he's becoming increasingly a powerful man, unchallenged if not also unchecked both by his allies and his party, Will he push ahead with those difficult reforms, or will he hold himself back because he wants to win Bihar, UP, Assam, perhaps even Bengal?
He's a complex man to understand. He sees himself in messianic terms, and I would agree with everything that has been said before me, that he believes that he needs to stamp himself on his government and on the state. Having said that, there's also a streak of realism in him, and he's shown that all his life. He's got a corrupt minister in his cabinet in Gujarat for years. Purushottam Solanki, one of them. He is able to compromise where he feels he has absolutely no room to maneuver. So I think you will see two things. A dominant part of him will try and force through policies which he feels rightly or wrongly are needed, and which he thinks can only be brought about by his own agency. And I think labour reform would be part of that. Secondly, if he thinks he can't bring that about in the short or medium term, he will wait till he sees the advantage accruing to him and push them forward at that stage.
Okay. There was a phrase that Akar used which I want to put to you. Mr. Modi sees himself in messianic terms. Is Messiah Modi what India needs, or is Messiah Modi the last thing a democracy wants?
A Messiah is the last thing that any democracy wants. I mean, in a modern democracy, 21st century democracy, I don't think you can rely on one God or one prophet to run any country, quite frankly. But that much having been said, I do agree that Modi does think himself, looks at himself in that mold, that he's the sole guy who will take this whole country forward. If you remember, Karan, last week I used a phrase. I said he uses disruptive innovation. He's done that in Maharashtra. He disrupted the entire process that the BJP...
The innovation still has to happen.
Yes, the innovation happened. He did it in Haryana. It worked in Haryana. Will he concede that maybe he was wrong in Maharashtra?
Can I put this to you? Mrs. Thatcher, who changed the face of Britain, saw herself pretty much in messianic terms. She believed she was almost born for the job she did. Some people believe she's created a new Britain. Others believe that she destroyed the old one and has polarized the country. Do you think Mr. Modi could have the same sort of result here? Critics and opponents versus friends quarreling over him?
Look, we have to be fair. We have to be fair to Mr. Modi. At the same time, we don't have to join the bandwagon with a trumpet from Mr. Modi, as a lot of people seem to be doing right now.
Let's call it a Shehnai since it's a Bharat.
Because it's so fashionable these days. Look, his strength is he's able to communicate directly to his constituency. Now, labour reform. What did he do? He knows that it's almost impossible to get legislation passed in Parliament. In any case, to amend Industrial Disputes Act in India at this point is going to be very tough. So what has he done? He's gone and addressed the labour. Shramev Jayate. He said, I will take inspectors out of your life because they make your lives impossible. Now, any labourer will be quite happy to get rid of inspectors.
Except those inspectors have gone out of the lives of industrialists. The labour unions are upset that they are being taken out.
Look, but the fact is that he has the skills and the presence of mind to try and sell reform to people who will be affected. I am pro-reform.
Okay.
The biggest problem with reform in 23 years has been that reformers in India have been very silent, and they've tried to do it by stealth. Now he's being bold enough in not doing it by stealth. And having said that, I will tell you his problem.
Look, very quickly, we are running out of time. I'm going to put this to you. The conclusion that I draw from that very cleverly crafted answer is that Mr. Modi will create more of an illusion of what he's doing rather than deliver on it. Like the example you gave me of labour reforms.
No.
Quickly, because we're out of time.
No. He will not create an illusion. He will be able to, on the positive side, he'll be able to sell it to a constituency. On the negative side, the BJP has got this strength because of strong chief ministers in 3 or 4 states.
Okay.
Will he now allow such strong personalities to rise in Maharashtra,
Okay.
Haryana?
The test is whether Vasundhara Raje Scindia's labour reforms will be accepted by the centre or not. That will prove Mr. Modi's own willingness to bite the bullet.
But I'm afraid
we've run right out of time. The man does have a 56-inch chest, I presume. Inside it, there has to be a pretty big heart.
I talked about the heart.
Okay. My thanks to all 4 of you for coming to studio. My thanks also to Vandita and Akar Patel for joining me. And if you have been, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow. But for tonight, goodbye. Good night.